Espera aí, mãe. Vou começar aqui, conversar com você. Você me ouve?
Ian?
Você me ouve?
Sim, sim, e eu te vejo também.
Tudo bem?
Sim, sim, estamos só esperando o professor chegar.
Tá ótimo.
Você quer apresentar ele ou você quer... Eu normalmente faço uma apresentação mais informal, mas e peço para eles se apresentar mais para o grupo, porque acho que eles nos contam melhor quem eles são.
Não, pode, tudo bem. Tá, não se preocupa não.
Espero que... Oi, Natália, tudo bem? Que bom! Natália Pires do INSPER. Que bom quando as pessoas se apresentam, porque aí fica mais interativo. This talk is going to be in English. Okay. We're just speaking in Portuguese before we start. As soon as the professor arrives, we'll speak in English because he speaks English. Ah, he's here.
Hello.
Hello.
Yes.
How are you?
How are you?
How are you?
Got up. Yeah, in the morning. Okay. In Hong Kong.
Early.
Yeah. Yes.
How are you, Professor?
Hi. How are you? Okay.
We're still not seeing you.
Oh, really?
We see a camera blocking. We see the space, but not your camera. I'm not sure why. Maybe do you have it with the protection to close?
No, I don't know.
It could be.
I just clicked.
It shows that you have a video. It just looks like it's.
Yes. Let me check with. No, I think I use my Zoom, but this is the first time I use webinar. Webinar. I don't know. How can I? Oh, okay. How do I? This is a.
It's a surprise for you.
Yes. Let me check if. Okay. Let me check if my wife can help me.
Okay.
怎么会webinar？原来是set up好的，这个我们看不到。干什么？怎么我这个webinar是那个的？
In terms of who you are, what's interesting.
Okay.
Yes, that would be great. And just to preface, we were very, very honored to have you as part of the seminar series. It's a great honor for us. We started the series to try to learn and think about the implications in terms of as political scientists, as social scientists, to try to understand better. And so we've been having conversations, and we really, really wanted to speak with scholars that have studied what has happened in the case of China. And it's really, we're so thankful that you've agreed to speak with us tonight. Tonight for us and this morning for you.
Yes, great. So I'll speak first.
Yes.
Okay, now I'll give you a very brief introduction of myself and my research. Okay, so thank you, Ian, for connecting us. Okay, I've been to Brazil for 3 times, okay, very briefly, and I was supposed to be there in the summer, right, for the World International Sociological Association World Congress, but unfortunately it was postponed, okay, next year. So I'm a sociologist, okay, by training, and interestingly, now I'm teaching at Hong Kong University of Science Technology, and I'm working on stratification inequality, and I conduct a number of surveys in the household longitudinal study in Hong Kong. And recently I expanded to Shanghai, okay, we replicated in Shanghai. And we were thinking about having something similar, okay, to in a big city like Wuhan, okay. So I was talking to Ian about some comparative study, right, you know, among metropolitan or metropolis, right, in different countries, okay. So one focus, okay, of my new interest is community, sometimes slash neighborhood, and how, you know, this in a very specific context, right, you know, inequality was created in terms of number of other, you know, outcome we're interested. Okay, now I actually interestingly, so I spent the fall in New York. Okay, I spent the fall in New York City. I was visiting NYU sociology in New York City. So I left there in mid-December. Okay, then I came back briefly. Okay, but I have a connection with Wuhan. So you can see here, I moved from one now called epicenter, right, to another epicenter. So so in on December, last day of December 30th, okay, 30, and I left in 31st, right? I went to Wuhan. I was invited by one of the 2 major, again, also a very, very top national university, but located in Wuhan, called Huazhong Central China University of Science Technology. You may notice I have a research center here, Center for Applied Social Economic Research, right? So they actually invite me to help them to set up. I said, I suggest a research center. I said, oh, just use this name. So they actually set up this center. I'm going to show you a little bit, you know, background of that. So we set up the center, had a ceremony. Okay, I'm finished. Okay, so I left. When I was there, I heard a little bit about the rumors, right? We didn't actually pay much attention. Okay, so I did not go anywhere. I just went directly to the university, and we had a ceremony, 1-day conference, and left in the evening. Okay, left in the evening from airport to Beijing. Okay, but when the virus, now it's called a pandemic, right? The epidemic broke up, and I actually asked 2 team members there. One of them was my former student, the other one, so that's the reason I got there, right? And the other one was from another university who also was a postdoc visitor to Hong Kong. So actually we form a team. We work together. We have a survey. Obviously at that point during the lockdown, okay, after a while I thought we should take advantage of the opportunities, right? So we initiated this kind of now actually making us closer, right? So otherwise possible, we don't know how to use Zoom. So we actually set up a meeting and we design a survey. Obviously survey it's not possible to conduct face-to-face, right? But we use use well, called a WeChat, the most popular social media, right? So we have questionnaires, right? But we actually train interviewers. Okay, we ask the students to recruit. Well, it's not a random sampling, right? But recruit based on some. You need to diversify. You need to be in Wuhan, etc., etc. So and we did a training. Okay, we did the training for students, and the students actually contact them, sort of more like face to face, right? But not really physically face to face. So we finished the survey. Okay, the survey was conducted between, I think, after 1 hour of lockdown, because we really need to design and I need to find some funding, right? And also we need to recruit interviewers, right? So we finished a survey, this is questionnaire survey, and again with a focus, right? This is most community governance, right? How during the people's, Wuhan, because it's a very, very radical lockdown, and most people basically the majority of people were placed on house arrest, sort of like that. You're not allowed to leave your home door. Okay, so later I will talk. So my talk today, right, were primarily based on some of the very preliminary findings. Yesterday, in order to prepare for this, right, ask other team member to give me a brief, sort of a preliminary description of data. I haven't got time to look at the data, and I just realized that nothing there. So I decided to do it, just tabulate it by myself, right? Because people don't know what I want to talk about, right? So so shall I share some of the slides to you?
Yes, please.
Okay.
And I'll remove us from the projection. I'll take our cameras off. We're still here, but we'll just take our cameras off so we can enjoy more what you're saying.
Can you see this?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Now, so actually, Lorena, you gave me a title called "Understanding COVID-19 Pandemic Insights from the Wuhan Experience," right? Indeed, I'm not from Wuhan. Now I'm in Hong Kong, right? But in my introduction, you see, actually, I'm sort of associated with Wuhan. Actually, from time to time, we talked, right, through the Zoom. We do have a team there. Okay, I have colleagues who there. Now we actually launched a qualitative ethnographic study. We actually picked up 6 communities. We'll do very intensive interviews. Okay, so not everybody, every kind of agents, right, will be interviewed. Will pick up a picture in how the community are dealing with the crisis. Now it's crisis over. Okay, of course. Now, so Wuhan. Now, very brief. Okay, because I only have 40 minutes. I will leave more 20 minutes, right? So I'll leave questions for Q&A discussion. So Wuhan is a capital for some of you, right, who don't know China's geography. Wuhan is the capital. It is indeed called it once, okay, or always. There is no name called Eastern Chicago, okay, because of a strategic geographic location. It's one of the major metropolitan city in China, in central China here, right? This is the Hubei province. Okay, so it's really hard at the center because of the geographic location. It's that actually it's a convenient. It's a gateway to like 9 provinces, right? So it's a transportation hub. Okay, so Wuhan is the epicenter. Hubei, right? So all China's cases, majority of the cases were happening in Hubei simply because Chinese government, when the epidemic broke out, they locked down like the whole province. Okay, so you would not allow, and in particular in Wuhan, and Wuhan, the population, right? More than 11 million. Okay, which is again is very, very large, right? Excuse me. Then Hubei, right? So you can see in Chinese case, right? China's case, there's 8,300, 88.3 something thousand, right? But the total Hubei account for more than 80% of the cases, and the other regions really are connected to the Hubei, okay, connected to Hubei because of the, the spread, right, geographic spread. So and Wuhan is Wuhan. That's 50,000. So that's and the world now, right? So it's keep updating, okay. So really, it happens. Now, my personal story is that I was about, because this is just in the eve of Chinese New Year, I was about to to take a plane, okay, to fly back to my hometown, okay, and province near Shanghai, right? So we already would book the ticket, all the things, but I saw just the one, media paper, right? Was again is because an expert epidemiologist visited the Wuhan, so he came back to Hong Kong. He wrote an article said that even worse, he just could not imagine, he could not imagine, it's terrible, something like that, right? But he could not get any correct information. Okay, all right, so we decided to cancel. Okay, so cancel the the flight, again, stay, and so on. But then it seems like we actually made a very, very wise decision, my family, and even now our colleagues and students will not, some of them still stuck in China. They will not be able to come back to Hong Kong. But anyhow, so you can see here, well, it's really when we started our survey, right? When we started, actually, not a plan, when we started our survey, things are actually it seems to be already stable, and these recovery cases, right, actually increase, and this is recovery cases, total infected cases. Okay, all right. Now, so Wuhan, right? Wuhan lockdown. Okay, lockdown since January 21st, right? So this total, okay, 76 days, 76 total lockdown. This lockdown is different from the suggestion you will see in Europe and in US, right? It was called social distancing, right? We use this term. This lockdown is completely, as I put this, house arrest, right? He said you're not allowed to leave your door, open your door. Okay, so that's really something that's not possible, right? In other societies. Okay, so that's why people say, why why US, Italy, Spain cannot copy this homework, right, from China, right? So people say not possible, again, because of political structure, right? I understand the seminars for in poli-science, right? Now you can say New York right now, that's another epicenter. Why is it horrible? Okay, when I was receiving the email from my colleagues in Wuhan, in New York City, right? And we were talking about Wuhan, but suddenly, okay, New York become a epicenter here, right? So Chinese, also the death case, right? It's just very few, okay, very few, because of the effective lockdown. So there are kind of, now if you look at, yesterday I saw this, right? The China, okay, obviously Israel, there's Germany, right? South Korea, but China again is one of the top country now. It's called safety, okay, safety ranking, right? But I was trying to find Brazil, I couldn't find. Okay, well, it's just unknown. Okay, unknown. I would not say it's the worst, right? Now, because here, right, it's not a safety, right? But then you will see here the China model be copied. I checked here here the treatment cases. Well, there's another one. I think I forgot, is risk, right? For risk, I could not, high risk countries, I still could not find Brazil in the list, right? That means we probably don't have much information about it. But anyhow, so can China model be copied, right? So that's really an issue of governance. So that's, I think, my talk, right? I will share you some of the, very preliminary descriptive. I haven't got time to do a more rigorous analysis. I'll give you some figures, okay, some impressions, and for discussion, I did have some information or some tabulation. I did not put it here, but I had an impression. I did know the results, so I can share with you. Okay, now here, so that's what I just said, right? We have this center. Okay, so really, we expect that we're going to do something. Mostly, before, I wish I could do something on like child development and the neighborhood communities, right? And the child development, we plan to do start an early childhood project. And the people in the center, this is the vice president of the university, right, came here, actually So we did have a formal center. That's no faculty line, but no resources, but just so we can use that as a way we for our research platform. So the survey, okay, we did. This is called a survey on community and social life during Wuhan's lockdown. Okay, lockdown. Although the worst time have gone, but I think what we did is that those people who you have to be in Wuhan. Okay, so you were locked down. Okay, 100% of being in Wuhan. If some people, it is said, right, 5 million people actually left during before Chinese New Year. That may actually worsen the spread of the the coronavirus, right? But we restrict those people who were locked and who could not live there. Okay, cohort sampling. Okay, so we ask a student, we recruit most of the students at home, right? We actually ask them to recruit and diversify. So each household, you only need to recruit one person, right? And diversify age and the socioeconomic status, etc., right? And the interview here is just like normal, but virtual, okay? Just like we talk, right? You're sitting, in front of me. And then, well, the questionnaires are taking about, 10, I think it's about 10 minutes, okay? But most people stay at home, okay? So it's an easier one. And then we actually seek their consent. So when they finish the interview, right? Please send us to make sure, right? Send us, because we use a mobile phone to conduct an interview. Send us where you are. So where is it? Mostly people at home, right? So therefore, we can know their address. Okay, they're not, actually we can match them to the communities. Okay, but we ask a lot of questions about the community. Okay? Community. So this takes this is about 2 weeks. Okay, in 2 weeks, okay, we completed 4,234. This is all valid, complete the cases. Okay, now I'm going to show you something described. First of all, is that whether it is representative, okay, of the population. We actually did some weighting, and we'll see this is gender, right? So slightly more female than males, right? Simply, I think because of this hasn't been weighted, right? And also, typically it would be female, younger generations, highly educated people. They're because they're more likely to have access to WeChat, right? And they know how to use it, right? So, but anyway, there are some biases, but again, after waiting, right, it seems like more diverse, the demographic profile. And here, so we do have here the general population, right? We found here is that older people tend to be, underrepresented simply because they don't know how to use mobile phone. Okay, so that really from our discussion or interview with the people, right? During the ethnographic study, we realized that a lot of problem caused by the older people, right? They encounter difficulties during this lockdown. Okay, there's no way for them to help. If you have a mobile phone, you can connect to friends, right? And your social network easily. So I'm going to touch upon that issues. Okay, so and we ask socioeconomic background, SES, right? Most people, again, it seems a few people in the upper class, right? So this is subjective identification, and upper middle, and most people identify as middle and a low middle, which is again I think is consistent with our regular survey, right? People tend to identify in the middle or even lower middle. Well, Communist Party members, right? After here, we see that exactly, okay, this is exactly what I think in the population general. I don't know the Wuhan situation, but in national, 14% of the adult population, right, were Communist Party members. Okay, so we do have these figures. And what is that? Ownership, again, which is quite consistent with, again, with some of the statistics we know about the national, in the national Chinese national representative Chinese General Social Survey, right? I did have some figures on that. It's pretty much consistent. Okay, so roughly, it's not too biased sample. Okay, now and also we ask people, right? We ask people their locations, right? They did. Okay, most of the Chinese people, once they agreed to participate in the survey, right? They actually again, that's the consent, right? So, but we were concerned about whether we should collect the people's address. And we had a question. So after they completed the interview, we asked them, do you mind to send us something? We did pay them. Okay, we paid for the interview, for the 10 minutes interview. So these are the locations, right? All the locations people came from. So these are really central areas of the metropolitan Wuhan. So this is the whole Wuhan city, right? So there's some suburbs, some villages. Okay, so most of this called in China is called a residential neighborhood. Okay, residential neighborhood and residential neighborhood. These are villages. Okay, villages. So our focus was on community, the role of community. Of course, we have a lot of information about the individuals, the depression. They're worried about future. These very subjective opinions, right? But our focus here, the perspective is on community, okay, the role of communities. Now, before I share you other preliminary findings, okay, I would like you to remind you, okay, so some of you, because this audience, right, China is quite different from Brazil, okay, how the society or it was organized. And my first time to travel a trip to Brazil. Indeed, I was invited by a company, with a consulting company, to talk about the Chinese society. Okay, so they really are interested. So this conference, I was paid to go there. This very preliminary logic. China is sometimes we call it authoritarian states, right? I call it called hierarchy, right? So society is organized as a hierarchy, top down. So typically you would have not a federal government, it's a central government represented by state council, right? And then under this jurisdiction, that will be called a province, right? Province. So Hubei province is here, right? China, the Hubei province. Then here, Wuhan city is part of Hubei province, right? Obviously, Wuhan city, because it's a capital city, it will enjoy slightly higher status, like semi-provincial status, right? Wuhan city. Then down to district, right? Let's talk about district, then and so on. So in terms of the city, right? That will be district, then to street, called street committee. Or that's like in New York City, that's called a borough. Okay, so streets and borough probably is here. Then streets, then down to so-called neighborhood, called residential neighborhood. Okay, resident within all the neighborhood is called official. Okay, official resident. They have clear boundary. You might have your residential quotas, right? The small areas divided. Okay, divided. Sometimes you have an entrance, like gates, to control the access. Okay. Now in rural, this is in urban, right? This is in rural. This is called a village. Okay. So village again. So I actually, when I talk about the Chinese society, right, for the control. So now in China during the lockdown. Okay, of the other part of China is that all villages again were blocked. Okay, so a lot of villages, right, blocked. So it just would not allow other people enter, right? Again, who did this, right? Is that you have this kind of, there are some people who organized to do this, right? So what I'm going to talk about in urban areas called a neighborhood, right? And sometimes slash village, because in some, so we have few villages, okay, in Wuhan, the suburban areas, okay, suburban areas. Now, so what I was trying to ask, I think is, did I have a figure? Now, for all this one, this again, so these people actually, for the 4,000 people, right, they actually came in represent, okay, we might end up with two or three, more than one people from the same community, right? But, they represent 1,000, okay, 1,116 communities, these units, right? Out of what, 3,000, 1/3 of the communities, right? These communities officially designated, okay, are communities. Now, what we ask that is during this lockdown, like almost like essentially house arrest, right? Is that how do you survive, right? What the community do for you, okay? So really, you can see here is a very, well, here is a yes, no, right? So you look at the yes. So these are some of the activities we know, okay? We know community was supposed to do, right? We ask them, so what they do. So this is, a translation called, like disease disease prevention, publicity, or sometimes we call it propaganda, right? propaganda. So all the information disseminated, right? So this is the work they organize. So tell them how do you do, stay at home, right? And wash your hands, right? Social distance, don't gather, okay? And secondly, release the information. This is also, so information is not just the information in the community. So it's who were affected, okay? So in the communities, how many cases today, who was newly affected, okay? Now then, clean and sanitation work, right? This is a measure temperature. So here, 56%, actually community workers come here to knock your door, not only say, prevent you, say, don't leave your home, right? But they also come into your door to measure your temperature, okay? Temperature, and so on. And here, okay, of course, there are some community, 1/3 of community, they actually send some free, supplies, some free, goods, right, to residents, probably in order to seek corporations, right? And also 60% of their help. Now, if you stay on, how do you eat, right? So they actually organize shopping, okay? 60% of them organized, okay? They actually they help you to shop, then place, then you just pick up, okay? So not all together, right? So they put them in front of your door, and you come outside to pick up, okay? So that, imagine this is for 2 months, right? More than 2 months they did this, and so on, okay? Well, this only less than 10% of community people said that community didn't do any work for them, okay? Didn't do any work for them. So that's 7 point, okay? So that's community work. I'll move a little bit. So then, of course,
hold on a second. Just the blue and the orange. The blue, the
blue, yes. Orange is the blue is no. Okay, the yes. So you should focus on yes, right?
Okay.
Focus on yes.
So
It's just 100. Yeah, minus, right? So add up together 100. But
okay.
Anyhow, now then again in China is that this is a system since the Mao period, right? This is already the socialist system, right? The hierarchical top-down system. But after China's economic reform and housing privatization, so if I own my apartment, right? I said it's 80% of they own your apartment, right? So you are supposed to have a property management company. You hire people. That's we paid you, right? To do. So what they do, okay? So obviously they also play their roles, okay? But this is really marketed. So basically you're hired by us, right? So by the owners. So what they did, okay, again, is that 72. Actually, they did that. Sometimes this in cooperation in line with the residential community, which represent the government. Okay. Now again, 60%, about the same, right? And again here, right? Well, they have to do something, and again, that's for shopping, right? So that really depending on what kind of community you are. If you are in like a high end, so I pay annual monthly fees, high monthly fees. I expect good service. Probably I'll ask this management company staff to help us to shop, right? To collective shopping and to ship the goods, right? The daily supply to us. Okay, so that's interesting. And why? And sometimes say nothing. But again, is that how China? So I call this is a government, okay, this community, residential community, this is what? This is more like a market, right? Market driven. So I paid somebody, you are paid by us, right? By the fee, management fees. And here, this is really society, it is civil society organized, okay? Now, here, so did you have a self-organize yourself to the self-organize, we call self-save, right? Well, the 60% is saying yes, okay? So I haven't got time to look at the cross tab, see how if this doesn't work, right? The government road or weak, and how do you self-organize, right? Did you join the WeChat group? This is technology, right? So how do you shop, right? Coordinate, what do you do, right? So they actually have a WeChat group. So I want to eat vegetable, what kind of vegetables, right? So you shop for me, and I'll pay you through WeChat, right? So therefore, I just a few minutes, 5 minutes, I went out to my people, actually put the goods I ordered, right, in front of my door. Okay, so that's a way. So that's 83% of people indeed use a WeChat group, share the information. Okay. All right. So this society. Now then, how do they evaluate it? Okay. So their role, residential communities, right, in fighting against the COVID-19, right? Most people, again, this is if nothing, right? That means 80 people say they're very unsatisfied, but majority of them actually is at least above the average. Okay, so they did, just imagine, right? You are not leaving your home for more than 2 months, right? Who is going to help you, right? And for all this daily supply. So interestingly, we have something about like shopping, right? What is the living condition? I forgot what this shopping. Medical supply. Oh, so it's what they did, what kind of work they did. Okay, so it's for shopping, 83%, right, through through the community, right? They help them. This medical supplies, they give you mask, right? The facial mask and some other medical supplies. They also help. Now, how long you account? So, and again, is that we did have something I'll quickly share with you. Is that how long will you encounter difficult when the time during the worst time was gone, right? So already for 13% of that, they already had difficulty. Okay, they were locked down, and then within a month, next month, so within a month, if things are not getting better, right? So 11% will say, well, probably they'll have difficulties, right, and so on. Only 1/3, 29%, they won't worry too much about that. Perhaps those are people like us, okay, so university professors and people working in the government, right? So they really don't need to worry too much about that, okay? Now, and we also ask people like, well, there is something about diet. I forgot. Is 50% of people said they actually their diet, right? Indeed, they could not eat what they want. Of course not, right? So really is significantly dropped, etc. Right? They only survived with a certain kind of sustainable food. But anyhow, the most important part I want to share with you, okay, again, is that initially when I was in Hong Kong, I keep my eyes closely, I will keep watching closely. So how this crisis, right, will lead to the post, it's more social and political consequence. Obviously now there's an unexpected one, which is what happened in Europe and the US, right? But we really, before we were concerned about the internal instability, right, political instability, and we ask a question about the political trust. And so the trust, indeed, here the trust is at different levels of trust, is whether you trust your neighbors, right? It turned out the neighbors here is a neighborhood trust, right? Is no change, but in 28% actually increase because you need to coordinate, right? To enhance. So before, most people, they seldom, we do have the figures talking about the frequency, how do you chat with how much you know about the neighbors, right? But those information, few people, 10% of people know exactly what the neighbors did, okay, the work. But now it's increased, right, versus decline. Okay, so most stay unchanged here. This is for neighborhood, right? For local government, the city government, right? They actually the trust dropped. Okay, trust dropped significantly. So that's the initial actually public outrage about the city government and the provincial government. When central government stepped in, that interests me always, right? So because it's hierarchical, so people immediately your next level, they should have responsibility for, right? Obviously, I think the whole structure, people talking about why the information did not release out. You have to report it to Beijing, right? That really, it takes much longer to get a feedback, right? And so you can see here, well, central government take the credits, right? Because they organize all other province, right? Medical staff to go to the Hubei to help, right? And they send the delegates, the working teams there, right? They remove, party secretary of Hubei and the party secretary of Wuhan city, right? So you can central government actually gain. So that means authoritarian regime, right? They effectively mobilized, right? Have a high mobilization or capacities, right? They actually gain from the credits. So these are, I think the current, the prevailing discourse now in China in the social media I observe, right, which is really trying to tend to strengthen the regime. Okay, and of course, I think a propaganda machine, right, also play very important roles. But again, so to summarize, okay, now again, China now so far I think is the most successful case. I don't believe in outsiders that China is still lying about the figures, etc. Okay, so once the system, once the machine, the hierarchical, the top, once it determined to do something, right, that can use entire country, mobilize entire country, right, to, of course, Hubei and the Wuhan sacrifice, okay? So the control really rests on the party state hierarchy. You can blame for the initial ignorance, right, the mistake, but then when they realize this, right, then just very effectively, okay, so the very low mortality, okay, and now it seems like everything is under control, okay, in China, and I don't think they're intentionally lying about any stats, okay. So based on my experience with SARS, when I first came to Hong Kong, right, that was during that period. Then secondly, I would say the grassroots community actually played a very important role, and I don't say whether if you have a similar thing in India or in Brazil, okay. So that's what we talk about. But the final point I want to make is really, it's not possible without now the technology penetration to people's daily life and the WeChat, etc. Again, that really intrude people's privacy now. Okay, so now it can actually, people believe this may be overused, and I talked to many university professors. They don't need to collect this kind of information. But now, if you're allowed to go outside, right? But they actually use a mobile phone. You need a passport, the health passport in your mobile phone to track your trajectory. So whenever you go to a place, if there is infected case, then can track all the people, whoever been here. Okay, so etc. So here I give you a last figure. This is really a question we ask is whether we know is a community release information about the infected case in the community. So who lives what, right, where in your community. So try to avoid that place or that floor. So again, this is unimaginable. In Hong Kong, we did publish, release information, but not in the community, but not even in the exact information about the cases, right? We know that community have the affected case. That's all. Okay. Now 70% of Chinese people, okay, that is surveyed in Wuhan said yes, of course, right? Of course. Only 30% said well, they had a concern. I think highly educated, I look at it as a highly educated, high SES people, they have concerns. What about after pandemic, right? Where I go, what I do, right? If you wanted, who collect this information, right? I cannot have any controls, right? So that's a worries about, is the party state authoritarian regime now they're penetrating to your private life. Okay, so that's my, okay, sorry a bit, okay. Yeah, you have any questions? So I'll stop sharing.
Wonderful. So what I did is, I thought first is, since Jan initially introduced us and made the connection, I asked Jan if he could kind of maybe think about asking some starting off discussion points to try to help get the discussion going. So we'll have Jan, and for the audience that doesn't know who he is, he's a student, he was a student, he's a former student. He completed his PhD in the Department of Sociology at the University of Sao Paulo. And he was taught by some professors, kind of shady professors, including me. And we kept in touch. And he, last year, I think, or 2 years ago, Yan, you moved and you've been working abroad and living in China. And I don't know if you want to introduce yourself and tell the audience a little bit about yourself before.
Okay, well, can you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay, so thank you, Lorena, for inviting. Thanks, Professor Wu, for being here with us. It's a pleasure to meet you again, even virtually. I'm, as Lorena said, I'm a PhD from the University of Sao Paulo, and I'm living in China for 2 years. Even I'm here in Brazil now. I came here in January, and I couldn't come back to to China, and now I cannot leave Brazil. So I'm locked down here in Brazil. And today I'm a researcher at the Brazilian Center for Analysis and Planning and at the Social Accountability International. And I've been invited by this project in which Lorena is the scientific coordinator to monitor and to identify the socioeconomic consequences of the pandemic in Brazil. And I'm very happy to join you in this project. We hope to do a good job and to help with this. So I try to be brief in my comments. So I have, I think, 2 questions. But first of all, I think it's a privilege for us, to researchers here in Brazil, to have such a primary and deep information from China, that now is for sure the most qualified nation to describe pandemic and to deal with the consequences. So the first point I'd like to make is related to the scale, right? All the world, and Brazil is not different, is discussing the economic impacts of the pandemic from a macro perspective. But what Professor Wu brought here is exactly the opposite. I mean, it's how the pandemic and everything related to the pandemic is experienced in daily life by individuals and communities. And I think everyone is worried about this too, and must be, because we see a lot of numbers in the televisions, in the news, but what's happening with people around the world. So we have a very fresh and deep data. I'm very happy to that Professor Wu shared with us. So this makes us think about how the Chinese culture and institutions shaped all this experience, right? I think this is a very important point, because I was in China during January, and I was there when the lockdown started. And now I'm here in Brazil, and I can see how different the society responds to the pandemic, and how people behave, and also how government respond to it. So the second one is related to a pre-existent social stratification structure and how it affects families' response to the pandemic. We know that socioeconomic stratification plays a very important role in shaping individuals and family lives. And I know Professor Wu is a scholar in social stratification, researches a lot, and knows a lot about Chinese social stratification. So I would like to ask Professor Wu this specific point. So looking for the data you have here, I know you didn't have time to analyze all of the data you collected. My first question is, you talk a little bit about this, but I'd like if you could talk a bit more. What's the role of the Chinese culture and institutions by one side, and what's the role of socioeconomic stratification on the other side? In other words, what I mean, what's general, the social stratification that's similar in every market society, what's specific to the Chinese society, the institutions, you talked about the political institutions, and culture, okay? I'm asking, as I told you, I'm asking this because what I'm seeing, I have experienced 2 different ways with dealing with it, and probably you can talk more about China about this. So the second question is more practical somehow. So what governments and welfare systems can learn from the Chinese experience, but not only from a broader institutional perspective, but also from a micro perspective. Let's say street level interactions between professionals, health professionals, and families. Because you said the community played a very important role. But besides community, how was the actions of the health professionals in the micro level, not as a big welfare system that starts in the central government and finishes in the individuals. And the last one, it's just, I got very impressed when you talked about, you divided your dimensions in state, market, and society. That's what makes well-being, right? And let's say everything looks to be very good in China. State, people believe in state because it works, it worked to control the pandemic. The market works very well, and people trust each other. So it seems to be the three dimensions. It's converging. Of course, this is a result from the research, but what's not going well in this combination? That's my question. Because
what is, say it again?
Yeah, you have state market and society, and your data show that both work very good. So what's not very good within it? So from your experience,
okay. What is it in this triangle relation?
Okay. Yes, okay. That's it. So thank you, and again, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Will there be another speaker?
No, you.
No. Oh, just me. Okay. So I thought I need to give time to another speaker. So all these are a good ones.
What we hope is just after you discuss Jan, we'll open. We have the audience, and the more people will ask. People are already writing questions.
Yeah, I saw an announcement. I saw that there was a seminar, and there are 2 speakers. Okay.
Yes. But, no. Everyone's online with this. We're just not showing everybody's picture.
Okay. Great. Well, the first question, I'm editing a journal, right? So we actually was trying to, the journal called the Chinese Sociological Review. We have a special issue call for paper for the special issue called the Family, Community, and a Nation State, right? In the coronavirus crisis. So the first question, I think only we can assume or presume, say, why, well, in China, you probably would not, in Chinese cases, it will be very difficult to differentiate between the role of so-called cultural and the institution of the political structure, political institution. The reason is, if you are ordered, stay at home, right? So you don't know is that can you afford not obeying, abide by the order, right? So this is a question, it's hard to answer, but then the reason I give you a ranking of the safety country ranking, right? You see here, in particular in East Asian countries, right? East Asian countries are, so far are doing particularly good, and people actually trying to actually link to. There's no statistic or very solid proof, right? But there is a sort of some kind of discussion, say, why South Korea, right? Korea initially, right, it's worse, but then it's pretty much under control, right? It did very well. Okay, Taiwan, and Taiwan sometimes, they both say they call it democracy, but then obviously, so that's. And Hong Kong now, is that in the first stage, the initial stage is that the government don't know how to do that. Once government have clear, they know how to handle this, right? So then they order people, not order, but actually some suggestions, right? Now, so far, it's we're not, our university is still closed. So after we open, for 2 weeks, we have a second wave of imported case from European countries and North American, right? So we actually we haven't been able to go back. Okay, so these cultural things certainly played a role. I would say, but it needs to be probably more comparative study, particular, right, in neighboring. So you would control both, democracy regimes, right, which I tend to overemphasize, like China's unique structures, right, and the culture, okay? So culture, it's hard to measure, but if we see certain country, we can classify them. So usually we'll say trust, right? Trust the government, obey authority, obey orders, etc. Right? So all these things may have may help to reduce the infections, okay? And so this is a question we're looking forward to look for more countries' data, right? Just like other cross-national comparative study now, because almost every since almost every country would have this kind of cases, right? and a statistic published online. So we simply just do as in the future, okay, do as what we did in other cross-national comparative studies to sort this out, or cultural or institutional perspective, right? But in China, it's just too unique, okay, too unique. You really cannot tell much. But perhaps in other, even in the rest of the other parts of China, this could also be a, so when we said is that it's not necessary to enforce that kind of strict rules. In Shanghai, people are not allowed to leave community, right? Shanghai, the case is even lower than Hong Kong and Taiwan, right? But they, this is over restricted. Okay, so so we will hope to do some comparative study between cities, but again, even among the communities, right? We were trying to replicate this in Shanghai. We already have the questionnaires, but now we will not be able to do that through even WeChat, right? So we have a household panel in Shanghai, so we'll plan to do that, to similar work in Shanghai. At least one module asking question about the community role in fighting against the coronavirus. The second question was about this health professionals, right? You can see that, that's perhaps, again, is that, if it was, in the Chinese case, I would say is that China, this is, again, is a very unique situation. So China is all province, right? So again, it's a top-down central mandate. This has always happened in China. So whenever you had any kind of a crisis, so they actually pair, each, so in Hubei, say each prefecture level city, they will pair with one province. Just imagine the rest of the province, right? So all the province will mobilize the health professionals, right? Send it to one city, one city, prefecture level city, okay? Prefecture level city. So I don't have exact figures. There must be, thousands of the 10,000, more than 10,000 of the health professionals mobilized, right? Was sent to Hubei to help, everywhere in Hubei to help, right? In Wuhan, the epicenter, right? Military, again, is that perhaps they need more, right? So that's more severe affected regions, right? So they have they mobilize the PLA, okay, helps the doctors and the nurse, right, to send it to Wuhan to help. So I think it's over the before is that if you allow people stay at home, they just they actually the family member were affected, right? Were infected. So maybe in just in 2 weeks, okay, they build up 2 hospitals, right? That's kind of the big, I don't know how to say that in English, right? So you put those suspected cases there, right, to isolate them, okay, and taking care about by health professionals from all of the countries, right? But because they only locked one province, and the neighboring. Now there are some interesting cases about those those regions, right, in between. Okay, so for example, people can easily cross the border, right, to another province. That caused indeed the fight between 2 neighboring province, the officials in 2 neighboring jurisdictions, prefectures or counties, etc. So I think this is something. You perhaps if you in the U.S., right, the situation, if China were not lockdown Hubei and Wuhan, right, that perhaps if we just spread all of the countries, that will, you probably only need to pray, right, and ask just with hope time passes and then a flattened curve, right, became you will not be able to do this mobilize health care professionals, right, to send to Hubei. So this just all the professionals. This is again, I don't know how to all it's supposed to coordinate by Beijing. Okay, Beijing, the Ministry of Waste and Health and what do you call Commission. Okay. that's and this also happened in many other, say, for example, 8 to Xinjiang, right? They also pair one. You know, I have friends who were sent to. So you have a you know each prefecture level. Okay, so this particular province, the other province like brothers, right? So each particular prefecture under that province, you will have a pairs, right? Pairs to the whole province. They help one very tiny prefectures, right? So usually the resources should be sufficient, okay, and under the condition is their own regions, right, their own province were under control, okay, we're not since we're not getting worse, okay. The last question was about the triangle: society, state, and the market, right? In this triangle, this is the framework I just adopted, just a convenient framework. But in this, you can see here is that state play much more stronger roles. Some of you, if I talk to people, maybe in the U.S., they know the earthquake about 10 years ago, okay, before Xi Jinping, before the current regime, right, in power. So in earthquake in Western Sichuan, at that point, you can see a very vibrant civil society, right, coming out. So this was not the order from the government, from top down. So as I said, it's all everything, right, was ordered from the Beijing, right? Once they know how to do it, right, they are aware of that. But again, it's a civil society, the immediate spontaneous civil society here were still I think is much weaker and closely monitored. Okay, so I put this. I see the three the pillars, right, and the society is weaker, and people are sitting there waiting for. Well, that's a government, the residential community workers, right, coming here, community workers coming here to help. And yesterday I chatted with people, our collaborators in Wuhan, is that, well, these community leaders, okay, these community workers were not simply from the community, right? Because the terms of the work, right, much work for you to do, okay? You help deliver supplies, right, help people shopping, all these things, all government employees, right? They have never been back for the past 2 months, right? The government staff, right? They were not allowed. So that's full-time, no weekend, okay? No weekend. Of course, they can be allowed to go back to home, but I heard is a lot of people actually they were just living in a dorm because they were afraid their work may they may get affected and affect their family members, right? So many people, okay, the government paid employees, they actually were sent to, because government were closed, right? Government office closed. So these people, you're paid by government, right? Again, is that probably they need to worry about their job security. But now, okay, so if you're not, this is what you were ordered to do, right? So if you're not, even you're not willing, okay, to do that, you might be punished, or maybe I don't know, okay. So you can see here is that people actually coming. So these people community really again was representing government, right? So and there are a lot of complaints about. So this particularly in Wuhan. I think if in Shenzhen, probably in other coast areas, you will see much stronger, more vibrant civil society. Today civil society nowadays was not used, even allowed to use, right, as a term in Chinese language. But you will see more that. But in Wuhan, that's traditionally dominated, right, by this. It's inland, right, more in line with this traditional system. But I can tell you a lot about this, right? But certainly is that even I call it social, okay, perhaps again, it's supposed to be organized. So government relatively, this part was weak, okay, relatively weak, and it can be strong. If it's strong, then creates problems, okay, troubles, okay. You might be suspicious, okay. And we did talk to some people like university faculty living in different kind of communities. For example, faculty housing, they were allowed, okay, in the Huazhong University of Science and Technology, right? The professor, they were at home, but they also were allowed to take one day out again, this was ordered by so residential community, they don't have enough staff to do this, right? So this was organized, but really by danwei. Again, my another stratification work, right, was about the so-called employee in the hierarchy. That's called danwei, right? They actually ask you to, to go out to do voluntary work for 1 day, okay? For 1 day, you may have some excuse, okay? Say you do not feel good, etc. But in general, people will follow, right? You go out to do their work. So I would say that in general here, about the social stratification, right? Now, if you look at some of the figures I look at, I do not have a very good measure of SES, but if we look at whether you encounter hardships, right, and uncertainty about the future, infected cases, all these things, right? If you tabulate with education, with residential neighborhood, with a subjective class, right? So this is pretty much similar to what we found in New York, say African Americans, right, or more like high proportion, disproportionately affected, etc. Right? So SES neighborhood and a poor neighborhood probably have a high death rate, etc. We do also have a lot of information about how many people in the communities, right? The affected cases and within the communities. So we haven't got time to merge that, right, to the data sets, and how that will affect people's the depression, other things, right? So these are all I think it's consistent with our general perception, even in China or in other countries, right? The general literature on social stratification in health. But one thing we found, okay, is yesterday our group meeting was something very interesting, but I have to look at the data to say whether this may be due to, say, this artifact, right? So maybe it's spurious. Is that you found that the party, we do have a 14% of party members, right? Those party members actually feel a much higher pressure. So our explanation, our colleagues in Wuhan, his interpretation would be, again, so most of them, they work in the government sectors, right? And again, they feel high pressure, okay, for the work, okay? So this community work and the government employees, right? So that's something unusual, because party member usually they would enjoy high SES, right? But this in particular, this might attribute to this particular mobilization structures, right? Do I miss anything?
No.
Yeah.
We have a question from Giseli. She's Giseli Pereira. She's a student of social sciences, but she asked for me to read her question.
Okay.
And she says what she'd like to ask you and to share a little bit of background. You're talking about, you're absolutely right that there's very different levels of lockdowns, right? Some people in Brazil use the word lockdown, but we don't come close. We have a encouraging social distancing and social isolation, but we don't have a lockdown in the sense that in Brazil, people are not even yet, we don't have it as at the level of what you're describing that was occurring. So she's asking, was the goal of the government policy, because we have in Brazil, a lot of the governors go and they say, oh, we're not yet high enough in the social distancing. We have to go higher. So in China, was the goal 100%, 90%? What was the level of, when we think lockdown, what does that mean in terms of, because she's saying you still had people moving, the community workers, security, the physicians, people who were working in the food, in the essential services were still being allowed to operate. So do we know what percent of the society was completely in lockdown and what percent was moving?
Okay, now for lockdown in, well, if I were talking about Wuhan, right? Wuhan is completely so-called well, that's an order from central government. So no one. So initial the slow response, because this is really radical change, right? No one has authority. Even city of the mayor of Wuhan and the governor of Hubei province, right? They would not have authority to forbidden people from leaving, right? Now, but then the order really issued, with approval from central government, the state council, to lock down. And I did not, I thought I have a figure, maybe I did not talk about. So the figure shows that, so lockdown means lockdown community. That again, is that you are not allowed to enter, to go outside of your community, right? Free. So you have to have a check. So anybody, so if you have a FedEx, right? Well, you are not allowed to deliver to your door to door. Okay, so you have to, somebody was sitting in front of the community gates, right? So you might, so that's, you need a lot of staff to work on to serve those people who are locked in. Okay, locked in. We have the figure to show, did you had a lockdown? Is 90% of community, people said, right? The community were completely locked down. Okay? It was closed. So this is very strict. I think it's overreaction, again, with huge cost, right? Economic cost. Now, so basically the economy was completely stopped, right? So now China was trying to mobilize, again, the rest of the country, right? To help the Wuhan, the economy. So you need to hire people from Wuhan, and also if they, they have some kind of products or some say fruits or something, right? Now they were able to ship out, right? So you please order, right, to help Wuhan or help Hubei, right? So this is the situation. But later, I think is to some extent, it's overreact, certainly, right, with a huge cost. But again, nobody knows, right? Nobody knows what. So now they actually have a classification. So they would have a, classify with more information available. They will have a high risk, medium risk, and a lower risk. And then they encourage lower risk to relax the control. But again, is that you're allowed to go outside, right? But again, now you have to, when you go outside, it already collect the information. You have barcodes, and so whenever you go outside, you may infected and get back. So they will be able to track you. So you went out to shopping mall, but suddenly there was a case from Russia, right? Then they will be able to track you and then warn the community. So again, I think just like it's no one. We never had any in social science. Okay, history never have a counterfactual, right? Counterfactual scenario. Just like initially we would say, well, the Chinese government, right? So Wuhan, because you control the information, it's not transparent, because no one can afford. If I say I raise the alert level, and well, what about if it didn't happen, right? Do the society want to pay the cost, the cost? And then we can, as originally I'm from China, right? So sometimes we say, this communist system, a non-democratic system, should be blamed for the hiding the information. But look at the U.S., right? The same situation. Now you have a more like a similar situation. What happened is initially you thought, well, this probably, well, it's a serious problem, but I don't want to cause panic to the society, right? So that probably is something I can imagine why the local government of Wuhan and Hubei province, right? They probably thought is that, we reported, but maybe to the public, there might be something we need to really, why, it's cause unnecessary panic, right? No one would know. No one knows, how serious this epidemic is, right? So I'm not trying to speak on behalf of the Chinese government, but you can just imagine, right? So the situation is that we're learning. Okay, so again, right now, they will have a much better regulation and information, right? Even for the system they collected for the health system, they actually developed the system in response to this pandemic. Okay, before they never had this kind of system installed in the app installed in your Apple, in your mobile phones. Okay, in your mobile phone. The other thing I want to say is what else? Yeah. Oh, okay. Anyway, so one more thing. While I study Wuhan, right? I just learned how bad, compared to other, say, city I know, Beijing and there's Shanghai, so for the so-called we study governance, right? The grassroots governance. Then no wonder why this epidemic, right, took place in Wuhan, is that we want information about communities. We ask, no one knows, right? So no one knows. Okay, so that's in Shanghai and Shenzhen, they already installed all kinds of, again, that's an investment, right? Investment, they have a clear community level statistics, how many people living here, right? They have a called grid management, which later probably Wuhan will do that because they learned the lessons, okay? They learned the lesson from, and I actually asked somebody who actually worked with closely, my collaborator, right? One of our collaborators, closely work with city government. I asked, what kind of information he has. He has a very close relationship because his former mentor, advisor was now is a deputy governor, vice governor of Hubei province, right? So, and in charge of health affairs, okay? So he knows, he said, there's no such kind of information in Wuhan, in Hubei, okay? And which I said, how come, right? In Shanghai, where I know my team already have this, right? We accumulate capital, we know somewhere you can get it, right? So I don't think the government intentionally want to hide the information from us, just simply they're not aware of this kind of social infrastructures, okay? They should have, okay? For in the US, you would have census tracts, right? The populations, well, the basic statistics in New York City, I can easily go there and find out, okay? And then you plug in all these infected cases and the mortality, right? Mapped in the neighborhood, okay? And the socioeconomic characteristics of demographics, right? Socioeconomic characteristics at the neighborhood level, a census tract, right? Equivalent to census tract, right? So Wuhan, this kind of infrastructure was not there yet.
Interesting. We have another question from Luis Suzigan, and he's asking, he also didn't want to ask his question, but he says that he wanted to ask, China's success in controlling the epidemic is mainly due to 3 factors. 1, strong state coordination. 2, high community bonds. 3, high technology penetration. Is that correct? If those are the 3, is that your conclusion, is that you need all 3? Yes?
Yes.
And so he says, so then comes the hard part, right? Because he says, if so, what's wrong in the case of the United States? What does the US share of those qualities?
Well, the case was, again, is the initial response, I mean, right? So that's what I'm saying. The counterfactor is that, well, even for the election, right? So Donald Trump did not want to, say, bring down the economy, right? So you can't say, you cannot afford to lock it down. So he actually keeps saying, well, this is not a problem, just like a flu, right? Et cetera, et cetera. So again, so that's under the system, which I think right now is that, well, perhaps in China is that China at that point, perhaps, the rest of the other 31 provinces may say, how come, why should we do this, right? Well, it's, well, I think that's from really a top, okay? I mean, it's a one person's decision. Now, you know who it is, right? So it's, and there's no other voice. I don't think this, so among the 3 factors, I would say the first is more effective, okay? But again, that's why I'm saying the China model cannot be copied to other society, okay? But again, other things, right, did play their role. So that means you do have a counterfactor, something similar, which I think Ian mentioned, raised a question about the culture, about the communities, right? Well, in other non-authoritarian neighboring region and countries, right, they did pretty well, okay? People tend to cooperate and before the things getting worse, right? So it's now once it getting worse, so people know that, right? You're afraid, you wanna be alive, right? So before things get worse, how come, right? Why my daily life will be just affected? I don't see any serious problem, okay? We know there's epidemic before before this one, right? So I just heard the name. I never thought this would be a problem, just around me, right? My daily life. So that's something I think right now in Hong Kong, the situation, right, was mostly due to people actually coming back, may have different kinds of perceptions or values, whatever. So people actually coming from Europe and the US, mostly in fact the case. Now it's over 1,000, okay? So before we pretty much under control, reopened. Now these people actually went outside, okay? So now Hong Kong enforce a very strict regulation. You could be arrested. Before you just say, oh, you come back, they ask you to do this, right? Just to stay at home. People, well, a lot of people go to bar, okay? So they went to bar. So that's things getting worse, okay? Here and right now, this more strictly. Perhaps I don't think it's. But the society also would not. What I'm saying is that it's not a good or bad. It means that society are different. People view their really is between individual rights and the social, the public interest or public safety, right? And also privacy, what I'm saying, right? So really, individual rights and order. Okay, so this we have a question in the law and society studies, right? So in East Asian countries, right? Certainly, okay, I think the community did play a role, okay, very important role, and also its organization. I think in Singapore, in Korea, okay, in South Korea, okay, this neighborhood, I did look at a comparative study of neighborhood, right? The neighborhood were quite different from the neighborhood, in the U.S., right? In the U.S., this is more like spontaneous. It's just rather here, this people said in the East Asian, the neighborhood in Tokyo, in Vietnam, in China, to a more extent, right? They are actually straddled between the society, the state and the society, right? And the state in China probably more lean towards the states. Okay, so this, and the third is about technology. Well, the technology, the worst situation I would say is that I cannot imagine. So you might say, if we don't have all this measure, the community control and also state coordination, right? We might expect something happen, but there will be a flattened, right? So in epidemiology, we know there will be a flattened, curve, but not this kind of a strong state, visible state interaction to disrupt them, okay? Disrupt the natural spread, right? But the penetration of the technology, the social media, the WeChat, right, really helped. I don't think in China, I saw another ranking talking about the social media, right? Except for Philippines, China, and the US, they are perhaps more higher. I think is the penetration is the highest of people using social media. But in the US and in China is censored, right? So that was social media. You do need a state coordination. So certain information suddenly, so we're frustrated. Okay, so a lot of people in the background like us, my former classmates, right, in China, they're frustrated. They share, but now it's a lot of things are blocked, right? But the U.S., the situation is that you see, the federal government and the state government. That's a democracy, right? How typical democracy works, right? And also this media. So this one, the technology only used for the reason, right? For the purpose of goals set up by the state and the community. That's my take. I think in all the three, right? Again, the first one perhaps is more important. Okay, I want to highlight.
Wonderful. We have a question from Murilo, and he's going to ask it live. Murilo, and anybody who wants to ask questions, I'm just taking the questions that people are sending. Murilo, do you want to ask?
Yes. Thank you so much for your talk. The first question would be, what are the economic impacts that Wuhan will face with the end of the lockdown? And the second one would be, will the government provide some sort of relief package to those in dire need? Thank you.
Oh, no, there are a lot of, so I haven't, believe me, so mostly Wuhan, that's completely, certainly the government, the economy is stopped, right? It's almost stopped for 2 months, okay? It's not, So US was talking about reopen the economy, right? And you know, just a few weeks, but Wuhan, just imagine, right? The Hubei, the particular Wuhan, right? 2 months, more than 2 months, right? So I assume there should be a lot of deficit for the government right now. I think when China was gradually, you know, move back to normal, again, they use the same model, right? But right now is China. I think for you know, for now it seems like attention has not been paid to Wuhan in particular. So with China was because the whole country during this period pretty much locked down. Okay, so now they were trying to get back to the normal. Okay, for some of the regions were not affected, right? To get normal, but unfortunately now is that once the factory opened, you know, well, the order was canceled, right, from Europe and the US. So that is unexpected, and no one had ever expected. So that's the consequence. So there will be even huge. So before we see the good sign, okay, very optimistic. So everything is under control, right? We're back to our life. But now seems, you know, we're even entering an even more bumping road, right? Is that China's, you know, fight against the U.S. and also most importantly is the economy. Initially, the economy was 6% predicted. Then they sort of down to 5 something. Okay, later in the first quarter, right, you may have a negative, okay, or 1%. And the next second quarter, the rest of the year, you will pick up just like what they saw in during the SARS, right? So then over the year, you will get 5.4% growth rate. But now, well, it's still positive, only positive, right? Your country, perhaps that's 1 or 2%, right? So that will cause a lot of problem, potential problem, and no one knows what will happen, okay? So I think the situation, the problem is for the country as a whole, not just the Wuhan itself. But once other parts get back to normal, I'm sure they will help Wuhan. And I just saw a hiring, like a recruitment, say that's only for, you know, just some university in Shanghai. They said, well, Wuhan, the graduates from Wuhan have priority. So I guess perhaps there's some kind of coordination, and if not mandates from the Beijing Ministry of Education, right? So, well, you know, they have tried to help them, and again is that on the WeChat, they will, you know, actually mobilize people, so they try to help Wuhan people, you know, order goods, services here, right? Once the business reopen, etc., etc. So far, okay. So there's no so-called relief the package as what we had in Hong Kong here or in the US. I don't know situation in Brazil. China did not have that kinds of universal packages, okay, universal package to help. But we would expect, again, the unemployment rate could be very, very high, okay? So what the problem, right? So once people lost their job, right? Again, really depending on what the authoritarian regime, right? This kind of whether they're resilient enough to accommodate there's some kind of unrest, but again, they will be able to, you know, to control. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Murilo. The other question we have, and I'm going to read it. The person asked to be anonymous. Their question, so we don't know who it is, but he says, I have a question for Professor Wu. I would like to know how Professor Wu may trust the figures given by the Chinese government on the number of cases and the death toll of the pandemics, given the fact that China has been concealing and distorting data in the last 70 years. Until today, we do not know the number of dead in the Great Leap Forward, the Cultural Revolution, and the Tiananmen Square massacre. Also, the Bloomberg investigation revealed that China inflated its GDP growth by 2% between 2008 and 2018. China has also closed its public archives to foreign researchers. The US intelligence community has also recently cast doubt on the statistics. Mark Scissors from the American Enterprise Institute has calculated that the real death toll is 3 million cases and 80,000 dead. Given these facts, do you have...
Okay. Well, okay, so I know what that means. Okay, so I'm teaching Chinese society. Okay, I think again, somebody from American enterprise. So this is so simple to naive. Okay, so that's I'm not speaking on, I'm not, I'm in Hong Kong, right? So perhaps I will speak, but a lot of bias in China is that really people need to. So just look at, I simply just say that where the stand, all the figures. There's no reason at this point, right, for Chinese government to lie. Okay, given the logic behind that, right? You just imagine that. So people, if you use, I look at some of the questions. Okay, some of the people who try to challenge that, they basically already have a standpoint before. Then they use 70 years. Okay, 70 years. I use one example to show that. Okay, so in my Chinese society class, it was actually was done by my respectable colleagues. Okay, so these guys, the figure you give, you can read them carefully. Okay, as a scholar. Okay, whether they can be published in a journal article. No. Okay, so this is really they cite some ad hoc, then make some kind of exaggeration plus imaginations. Okay. Now, one particular example I give you is that done by economists, which I respect, is China economist Komrovsky at Pittsburgh. They actually he basically is a comments which was cited by the media against say China lies, that that was when I first 17 years ago when I came here to Hong Kong. People say Chinese GDP were lying. Okay, so it's all this faked. Because you look at the electricity volume they used and suppose, right? So and the GDP output. So if they say if the energy use, right? Well, it's sort of stable, but you can't imagine that the massive economic growth, right? Then simple. This is bivariate regression, right? We know if we learn the statistics. Tom is an area specialist. He's not no, he basically raised the questions with question marks, right? But this based on this negative or this bivariate relationship was based on a lot of assumptions, right? So China's energy efficient use, right? They may improve. Okay, so he put some kind of concern, but it was just taken away by media, say, oh, China lying or all the statistics. Otherwise, you might say, oh, China is still, again, the people actually. So at that point, people quote, Komrovsky's question, the essay saying China's economic growth was negative, and just ask anybody in China over not 70 years, like 17 years, right? So is China experience an economic contraction, slowdown, and so obviously not, right? So again, is that you ask people, say 2 million. I think where you are, your dream, right? You might. So these are something that's why I understand why people want to put the anonymous. But really, as a social scientist, objective, right? So I would say that I would not, will leave judgment to you. So with the system, whether I prefer to live in what kind of a system, right? But at least for the figures, right? The information digest, a lot of informations, right? Online, we really need to be careful. But I personally, I think there's no way for Chinese figures, right? The figures are correct, okay? If there were some hidings, right, or hidings, that was something certainly was not intention. Certainly, well, there's one or two cases was there's media, right? So there were just the social media. You really cannot control. You can control, censor something. There's one or few cases just probably in response to this 2 million. So there's one or two cases that they said that they did not report it. Okay, so this was the cases that was counted before. The government actually came out to clarify the information. This was released, and then he was returned to the hospital. Okay, did not recover fully. So this information, but I think the system again, the system, okay, for the information flow. The hierarchical party states, this non-free, right, authoritarian regime really had a problem. Okay, really had a problem. Okay, for the public to know. But then once it becomes a problem, right, it will deal with it more efficiently. Okay, so that's a pro and a cons of when a society really encounter a crisis. Okay.
Yes. So I think, like, if I can ask a question, talking a little bit about how you're explaining and thinking, since we're calling you from Sao Paulo, right?
Yes.
We're the economic center of the country. We're kind of like everything flows through us, and we're kind of the center of the country. And what you're talking about is in the case that we see in Wuhan, it happens in the periphery, right? So it doesn't happen in a place that, yes. So part of the explanation is that it took time for the information to be communicated to the central authorities and for the central government to intervene. But why was the local government in the beginning so hesitant to act? What do you get from the people who slain on the ground? Was it not clear in the beginning that it was so serious, or was it more fear of making the wrong decision? And because it's interesting to think SARS, the other epidemics happened where in China, in different places.
Yeah, in Guangdong.
Yes. So
yes,
for the leaders in these local communities, this was really the first time that they were rehearsing this, or was this community affected by SARS, and did it have no? Okay.
Well, then let me. Well, that's I think the one thing is that Wuhan is not really. So the things are getting worse, like because this is during Chinese New Year, right? Wuhan certainly is not the center, the economic center, but it was one of the, still it's a hub, I mean, right? So people said that 5 million people actually, because this really happened before the Chinese New Year Eve. So people said, it is said 5 million people actually left Wuhan for Chinese New Year, but mostly to neighboring. 5 million live in Wuhan. That's for within the province, right? So that's why Hubei was locked down. Most of the people, these are really local. Most of the migrants, right? We have 10% of migrants in our sample. So most of the migrants were from neighboring. So Wuhan has not become a national center to attract people to. So most of us, neighboring province and within the province migration, right? So there's rural, so they spread. So that's not much, and there were some cases of Wuhan is a center. Those middle class people, they actually use a holiday vacation to travel. So Hong Kong case, the first case was reported from the parents of a Hong Kong resident who was originally from Wuhan, right? So they were affected. This is I think again is a Chinese New Year. Most people actually no work, stay at home. So it's easier to log, at least for about half. 2 weeks or so. 2 weeks, that's a long holiday, right? So those things will help to curb the spread. Okay, but again, on the other hand, local spread, community spread, you have gatherings, right? But at least they don't go to work, right? So that's most people actually that's a vacation. But why Wuhan is a place they never had this kind of experience, okay? This kind of experience. SARS happened in neighboring Guangdong. It actually affected Hong Kong most severely. So Hong Kong this time they dealt well because they have a very, very suffering memories. I actually came here during that period, okay, to Hong Kong during that period. So they had a very, very horrible experience of Hong Kong hurt most because it's a highly dense, right? Densely populated city, right? So it happened in Wuhan, and somebody actually during Chinese New Year, in Guangzhou, the capital of Guangdong province, came to Hong Kong to visit, attended just a banquet. So he affected everybody here, and it just spread to become a community infections, right? So the government, the local government of Wuhan, as I said, this is a governance issue. It's a political structure issue. Is that there is a system professionally. They already had a system to report. Okay, then the question is that the current Chinese law, they have, because the information was not supposed, to be announced by the city government, right? So they have to get a test. US, the problem is the same, is that they have to send the sample, right, to some companies, I think in Shenzhen to test, to authorize, Beijing authorize them to test. That takes a long time for them to learn this, right? Obviously later, you know, they, at least a group of people know the situation, know this is how serious, right? This is could well perhaps can affect that, in fact, you know, among people. But the other way, from now I can guess, I was very frustrated at the very beginning. Now is that you really need to wait, cost and again, to announce whether this is an epidemic, this is a pandemic, right? Etc. But initially they should do that, right? So that again is that I think it goes to, they should isolate people even without announcing this is a sort of like epidemic to cause panic, right? And stop the whole economy. They should, but they don't have experience, I believe, okay? They don't have experience. And during Chinese New Year, this is again, usually the big season to do business, right? How can you just suddenly, never in history, I believe in history in China, right? So you really, if nothing happened, then, well, you probably will cause some kind of public outrages, right? So you basically balloon the fortune of the whole year for most of Chinese people, right? So that is something now I can sort of, okay, I was trying to, as a social scientist, I'm trying to understand the logic behind that. Certainly they don't have experience, particularly avoid these kind of community infections, okay? And I think Hong Kong, we're doing better, okay? We're doing much better because the situation, they also the wait and see. So sometimes that, you know, they actually, you know, use a different kind of different level of measures, right? But now is that they actually, you know, prevent, you know, all the foreigners, right, not holding Hong Kong resident card coming to Hong Kong, right? So before, well, they still want to say whether we should close the border. This is a political, not only economic situation, but also political. Before that was economic, then become a political situation. But now so far is that in Hong Kong, life is quite normal. If you go out, so no one prevents you to go out, and you go to the shopping malls, everything is normal, but you probably don't want to go, right? So there are 10,000 bus the truck drivers shipping goods from China every day. So how can you quarantine them, right? So otherwise you don't have a supply. So the situation, but they learn how to deal with this, okay?
So Luis is asking a related question to me is, if you think that the pandemic will lead to more centralization in China, because since it's related to my question a little bit, is that since it was so hard for the local government to respond and the central government had to come in, and also I guess talking a little bit about the irony in the case of where we live, that in our case we have exactly the problem that we don't have a centralized response to the pandemic in this moment. So what do you think about that? Do you think that China...
So how serious? So I was trying to find some information from Brazil. Are you this is serious concern there, or people are still? Oh.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, you better. Okay, prepare.
We can send you the research, but the problem we have is that the response is being driven by local authorities, and the federal government is not clear in terms of how to respond. And today the Minister of Health was fired. So we have a new Minister of Health coming in, but the last couple of weeks, there's been a lot of lack of clarity and leadership, and it's made it very difficult for the federal government, because it's not leading the strategy. The federal government is in a very kind of confused role in how to respond, because within the government, there's infighting between ministries about how to respond correctly. And so especially the president feels very strongly, and it's created a lot of difficulties because the epicenter, of course, is in Sao Paulo, And so one of the governors also has like a political opposition role with the president. So there's lots of complicating factors. But the fact is that the governors are trying to coordinate within the states a strategy, because there's not a federal driven strategy in many areas. And so even in Brazil, it comes very apparently clear that we need centralization is very important during a pandemic. You need central coordination for all the reasons that we're talking about. The transmission goes through the economic lifeline of the country. So transmission, all of the impact, you're not able to self-isolate in the case of without central coordination. You can't self-isolate and reduce the spread. So we're seeing the impact of that locally in different municipalities and at the country level across states. So here, there's a lot of discussions about the need to have a stronger central response. And so we're curious about, what do you think about China? Do you think that the solution is that this really is, pandemics are about central governments, not about local governments?
I think the special issue I have, right? So that's the last one called the nation state. I mean, well, I can understand, you know, if you look at the exchange between New York state governor and Donald Trump, right? You can say, well, that's something very funny, but I mean, that's normal. We can understand. But during this high crisis, I would not say, well, democracy certainly is good, you know, during the peaceful time. But in terms of the crisis, right, you need a centralized coordinations, right? And the only thing you can, because I don't know whether you can lock down or you can prevent people leaving Sao Paulo or block people from entering Sao Paulo. This certainly, it's not something, well, for the nation state, you really need to do, you have immigration controls, right? So what in Chinese case is that they can almost completely lock down Wuhan and Hubei within China, right? Within China. But I think for other countries, other systems, and others, it's just not possible. Not possible. So how can you say, well, that's you basically unless you jeopardize people's personal freedoms, right? How can you imagine you basically prevent people from leaving their home? You're arrested, right? How you're under house arrest. So I think well, even you might, local government can have some kind of, as I said, publish some kind of suggestions, regulations, but you really cannot enforce it as strictly as a law. The only thing you can prevent, right, would be certainly is a central organizing to isolate the, so preventing people from entering. This is one, right? Then the second is the coordination among different regions. Okay, social distance. This is the way for individual perspective we can do that, right? But I think for regional people's flow, the mobility and the regulation, you do need a coordination among different regions, like Sao Paulo with your neighboring city or regions, right? So this, as I said, the Hubei province, the officials of Hubei province fight against with officials from Jiangxi. They don't want Hubei people coming to Jiangxi, right? There's only one bridge. Okay, one bridge, right? It's very, sometimes close border, but this is none of ours, right? So I don't want to, for government officials, they will say, this is not about business. Don't just, keep bringing trouble to me, right? So you see, even in China, right, within the country, you will see you do need some, even under this top-down, highly coordinated system, right? Obviously, I'm sure they will solve the problem, right, from top. And the Chinese Hubei experience was that, this was led by a deputy premier. So usually that's a Chinese way to do that. You will have an ad hoc working group. You probably need to give them clarify the responsibility with a working group with certain people. This coordination is an emergency, right? Crisis. You have a health minister, public security, sector, national security, whatever, economic or other education, for example, for school reopening. all these, key sectors, right? They're coming together to form a ad hoc, but this was an emergency group, right? So they can sit working as a group to coordinate. I think this is always a Chinese way to do that. And that was a delegates, like working group team, right? Sent from Beijing to Wuhan. So the vice premier, there was a 70-year-old lady, right? Who was a vice premier, who was in charge of health affairs, right? Who were there since the lockdown, okay? So who were there, and certainly because he was really national, right? So over there, if you want to coordinate, he would have authority to coordinate all these, like assistant from different departments, different provinces, right? He has a higher level of authority, but he was staying in Wuhan, so in the epidemic center. So I believe, now I don't know how the system will work, right? But Brazilian society was quite different. Okay, I know you have a lot of freedom, right? Which is sometimes good, but in here is that the other way is that I would say for individual perspective is you follow the guidance, right? And with the hope is this epidemic. Well, you have a flattened curve, right? You see U.S., right? You might say New York probably pretty much done, okay? But you just pray you will not be part of those figures, right? In those figures, then. But the problem now is in U.S. is that because the lack of coordination, then you see other states, right? Other, the metropolitan areas have become another. So I saw one research report published by NYU said, well, New York is just vanguard, the first one. So they will be next, right? So New York just happened because it's connected to Europe, and São Paulo is the same, right? So the situation is that perhaps under São Paulo is trying to curb the spread, but again is that you want to try to avoid other cities, right? Other cities like will be next São Paulo, okay? So because these were perhaps was imported case from outside of Brazil, right? And you don't want them to spread to the rest of the country, okay? So that's perhaps you need a sort of more central level coordinations.
Okay.
And I think local people and this state government, they do have the incentive to participate, right? To have better coordinations. But again, if politics, become a factor in calculation, that becomes, I believe they, exchange the argument between, Democrats and Republicans, Donald Trump and the New York State governor, right? Mostly this is about politics. So you throw back and forth, right? So if politics become a part of this, you need more wisdom, like political wisdom to solve this. But I do believe you should have for local government interest. They do have incentive, right, to coming together to work, and they should realize this is not a pandemic, right? This is as I said, you can isolate in the national border, right? But within one country, it will be very difficult without the central on a state level or central government level coordinations.
Yes. Well, Professor, it's been an amazing conversation. We have learned so much from you tonight, and we're so we hope this is the beginning of a longer ongoing conversation, and that I know we're doing research here in Brazil. We're starting to do a lot of research, so I'm sure that we're going to have a lot of reasons to collaborate and to learn more from each other as we struggle through the pandemic. And we're really honored that you were so candid and so forthcoming, and also so willing to accommodate with the time difference and everything to be able to participate in the seminar session. So thank you very much. Right. And hopefully we hope to speak with you soon.
Okay, so my great pleasure, okay, to speak. I think this actually brings us closer, right? Because of the, before we don't use a webinar, we don't use Zooms, right? But now it's easier. So I haven't seen many people since in the past 3 months, right? But I don't feel like I'm isolated, okay? So that's a good, thanks to the technology. But it's, again, it's, thank you, Ian, for inviting me. And it's great pleasure. Okay, so Lorena, okay, to speak. So you guys speak English or just for this seminar?
No, the rest of the seminars,
teaching?
The rest of the seminars we do in Portuguese. If we had a couple in English, but we work in multiple languages.
Okay, great. Okay, so my great pleasure, and this is indeed my first talk. Okay, so public or seminar. Okay, since the lockdown Wuhan, so since the Chinese New Year, yes, more than 3 months. Okay, 3 months. So I'm gonna have a second one. Okay, on this I teach, but but teach a class, but I never, and I will hold some research group meeting, but I never had this, give a seminar. Like
yes,
this.
I think we have to think of the positive, right? And one of the things that's important is that we've seen that the pandemic is about scientists collaborating across countries. We're learning so much about how to use technology for good.
Really, yes. So it's not possible for me to fly to Brazil to give a seminar talk, right? But now it's easier. So I hope in the future we have more collaborations and exchange. I don't believe we should go through before. My first time I was in Brazil, I said we don't need to go through US, right? So I was invited by US scholar to go to Brazil. We don't have a direct flight, but now I think we did talk about, right? So it's a lot of interesting things. I work in China, right? A lot of interesting things we need to share with each other as one of actually major countries, right? China and Brazil, and there are a lot of difference, but also similarities, right? So social scientists, I think for comparative study, a lot of interesting things could we can work together. Okay, I actually look forward to learning more from you, okay, from your research in this particular project, but also from other knowledge about Brazilian society.
Wonderful. Well, we promise to be in touch. Jan and I will we'll be in touch with you. And thank you very much. And to the audience.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you very much, Professor.
Stay well. Okay, stay healthy, safety. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
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 Good night.